But here, I want you to meet Alex Nowrasteh. He's a senior immigration policy analyst at the Cato Institute Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity. His publications have appeared on the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the Washington Post, and many others. He's also the co-author of the booklet Open Immigration, Yay and Nay, which he wrote with Mark Krikorian. He has really interesting ideas about immigration, and they're based on fact, which I kind of find interesting. I hate having facts on the show, but we're going to let him get in. Alex, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. Let's begin. I mean, they're debating border security as we speak, and trying to keep the government open and trying to keep from there being a state of emergency. Is there a crisis on the border?
Kind of. So there's two different ways to think about this. One is taking a look at the total number of illegal immigrants who are being apprehended on the border. And the second is taking a look at who they are. So if you take a look at just the total number, we're basically down to the same numbers that there were in the early 1970s. Somewhere around 400,000 to 500,000. Not nearly that many. When I was in high school in 2000, there were about 1.6 million. So we're way down compared to that. However, the type of person who is coming has changed dramatically. Whereas when in the year 2000 and previous years in the 70s, it was mostly single individuals, mostly single men who are coming to work. Now it's overwhelmingly family units, parents with their children, women with children. And that is an entirely different scenario. They're coming here to ask for asylum. The vast majority of them are at least asking for it, which means that instead of trying to avoid Border Patrol agents, which has been like the history of immigration on the border and illegal immigration forever, they're coming in and then turning themselves into Border Patrol agents asking for asylum. That's a very different scenario, a very different situation than what we have seen in the past. So is it a crisis? It is if you take a look just at the family units and children, but in terms of total numbers, we're doing pretty well.
So is Trump right when he say his new thing sounds like Johnny Cochran, build the wall and crime will fall? Is that accurate? Does that have any relationship to the facts at all?
I don't think it does have any relationship. First off, just because the nature of this flow of illegal immigrants into the U.S. has changed, in fact, that they're asking for asylum, a wall wouldn't stop them from being able to ask for asylum. It's their right under U.S. law. U.S. law grants them that power. So a wall is not going to really stop them from doing so. Secondly, there is no evidence that illegal immigrants increase crime in the United States, and plenty of counter evidence that shows that illegal immigrants are less likely to commit crimes in the United States, less likely to be convicted of those crimes, less likely to be incarcerated, and that crime along the border, especially homicide rates, are below the national average in those 23 U.S. counties along the border than they are in the interior of the United States. There's a vast amount of research. I spend like all my time reading this research from peer-reviewed academic studies going back, some of them over a century, to look at the evidence. And overall, immigrants are less likely than natives to be incarcerated or commit crimes, and that still holds for illegal immigrants. Now,
I've heard that some of these studies that it's very hard to get the information on who's illegal and who's legal when it comes to crime because the agencies don't release that. Is that true?
So that is true in 49 out of 50 states. There is, however, one state which counts the convictions of people by crime and their immigration status, and it keeps that data by year. That is the state of Texas. The state of Texas has the second highest illegal immigrant population of any state, right behind California. It's a border state with Mexico. It's a Republican governed state. It has a tradition of the rule of law and of enforcing criminal laws. So they're not, hiding these numbers. And what we found there is in the year 2015, the criminal conviction rate for illegal immigrants was 1/2 that of native-born Americans. And the homicide conviction rate was 16% below that of native-born Americans. So it's true, in any large population, you're going to have people who are criminals. But when we take a look at it overall, they are less likely in the state of Texas, where we have this data, to commit crime, to be convicted of crimes overall, and to commit homicides.
So what about people who say, just by coming into the country illegally, they become criminals? it really does bother me. The only thing really about this issue that bothers me is the disregard for the rule of law, that we have legislators who are basically, I mean, I was stunned when Chuck Schumer waved a pen around and said, Donald Trump could solve this problem with his pen. I thought, you're a senator, you're supposed to be making laws. It cannot be good for a country to have laws like prohibition or border laws that people just don't obey and don't get punished for disobeying, can it? I mean, isn't that a problem in and of itself?
Of course, yeah, it's a huge problem in and of itself. Mass illegality, whether it's in immigration or, gun laws or drug laws or anything else, is always a problem. But I think if you want people to respect the law, then the law needs to be respectable. It needs to be enforceable. It needs to comport with our values as both human beings and as Americans, and it needs to be enforceable. Like when I take a look at really bad laws in America's past, you mentioned, for instance, prohibition. I don't blame the huge black markets that arose in the 1920s due to prohibition on a lack of the government for trying to solve it. No, the problem was the law was bad. And they learned and they fixed the law and they changed it. And I think we need to do the same thing when it comes to immigration. It's very difficult to come to this country lawfully, especially if you're a low-skilled worker who doesn't have any American family here. That's the reason why the vast majority of illegal immigrants come. I think if we fix that law, we can take this pressure off of the border, take the pressure off Border Patrol agents, channel most of those folks into the legal system. We know who they are. We can check them out. We can exclude criminals. And that will restore, I think, trust in the law, trust that the system works, and really clean up this entire mess.
Isn't there, when you say that, though, it strikes me that there's an overarching debate to that we just aren't having, which is whether immigration is our responsibility. Is it our responsibility to open up our borders to people who want to come in? Or is it their responsibility to be the kind of quality people that we want to allow in? In other words, is it a privilege for them, or is it a moral responsibility for us? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it's both. And I think there's a third group that you missed in there, and that is the desire and demand for American citizens to deal with, the contract, to hire, to sell to people who want to come here legally and work but aren't allowed to. So there's also this other third group, the forgotten man in this. I mean, I think that obviously the United States government has the power and should have the power to write immigration laws and to determine who can come into this country. And immigrants should have to enforce those rules, but we need better rules. We need better laws, and we're not going to get that situation by trying to enforce the bad laws that we did. I mean, I take a look at the immigration system in this country, and it reminds me of something designed by a person in the Soviet Union, by an apparatchik who wants to centrally plan, the demographics and population of this country. Now, those apparatchiks probably sat back and were like, hey, why isn't everybody conforming to our 5-year plan? It's their responsibility to do it. And, I guess that's true, but they could also make a better plan and a better law. And that's where I see the situation now. A lot of this is done by our own government making mistakes, which I'm sure is, no surprise to you.
No, let's talk about that. You got 17 guys, a bipartisan committee. They're now debating this. If you could have your wish list, what would you see come out of that debate?
So I think the number one thing that I'd like to see is a way to, one, I think for the DACA kids, the kids who were brought here as children or under the age of 18, who have signed up for this program, for them to get legalized. I think that's important. I think trying to make a serious show, perhaps, of some kind of border security initiative is probably important as well. But the number one thing, the most important thing, is to expand the number of lower skilled guest worker visas so that these folks who are coming up to the border right now, who are coming there, can actually come in legally and work rather than going through this mostly fictional facade of applying for asylum and trying to get in that way. If you do that, you take the pressure off the border. The idea that it's a crisis goes away, and we can have a much more sort of calm and rational discussion about it, rather than being confronted with pictures of scary looking caravans.
It does seem to me that, this has been going on for decades. It's not Donald Trump causing it. And they have been absolutely stagnant in this. And one of the problems is that we frequently hear, we have to give amnesty to the DACA kids or whoever are the problem at that time. And then down the line, we're going to deal with border security. And people, I believe that people are simply offended by the fact that people can come in illegally. I think that just offends people's sensibilities. They feel we should be in control. So isn't there going to have to be a genuine commitment to border security? I mean, and wouldn't that include some kind of barrier in some places?
It probably would. I mean, right now the border is 1,954 miles long. There are about 350 miles of, barriers, fences currently that keep out pedestrians. About another 300 miles of, fencing and vehicle barriers, basically to keep out vehicles, but you and I could climb over them. I mean, adding to that might make sense in some places, but I really think that debate misses the thing that will actually work. In the 1950s, we had over 2 million illegal Mexican immigrants in the United States, and President Eisenhower was able to shrink that number by 90% and cut the number coming in illegally by 95% by creating a low-skilled guest worker visa program that allows Americans to hire them, allows these workers to come in legally. That's the thing that worked. That's what I wish we were having this discussion over. In 1986, they said we're going to increase border security, interior enforcement, and we're going to amnesty these people. They did do all of those. We had 6 times as many Border Patrol agents by 2010 than we did in 1986. We have more barriers than we ever did before. We have interior enforcement where you actually have to fill out paperwork whenever you hire somebody. Now, none of it works nearly as well as anybody wants it to, but we do have a lot more, and it's simply not working. I think we should try the thing that Eisenhower did,
Which is
to allow more people to come in legally on temporary worker visas so they can go back and forth, so we can know who they are, we can check them out, we can keep out criminals, and then Border Patrol can focus on a small number of people who are left who are trying to come in illegally and stop those folks.
And what about the argument that those people are taking jobs away from poor Americans?
Yeah, there's really not much evidence of that. The vast majority of empirical academic research on this finds that immigrants have a slight positive effect on the wages of Americans because they're not just workers, but they also buy the goods and services produced by other Americans. And they primarily purchase the goods and services produced by lower skilled Americans because, we can't import a haircut from China yet or a hamburger, but low-skilled Americans produce those things. Now, just to put that in perspective, the most negative finding in the entire academic peer-reviewed literature on the effect of immigration on wages is by George Borjas. He's at Harvard University. He found that wages of high school dropouts in the United States, about 9% of American adults are high school dropouts, by the way, declined by about 1.7% from 1990 to 2010 due to immigration. But the wages of every single other American group by education, 91% of us, went up as a result of immigration. So I think there's a lot of other things we can do to help poor Americans other than trying to diminish the number of, poorer immigrants coming in who are trying to work and making the rest of us wealthier in the process.
And my final question, what about their use of government services? I mean, they frequently say you can have open borders or a welfare state, but you can't have both. Is there a drain on services that illegals use?
Yeah, so this literature is called the fiscal impact literature, or the net fiscal impact. And generally the findings are in the peer-reviewed literature is that immigrants about pay their own way in this, or they produce a very small surplus. Part of the big reason is when they come in. So for instance, I was born in California. I went to public school in California. I cost $10,000 to $30,000 per year of public school that I used before I could pay any taxes as an adult working. But if you come in here at the age of 19 and you're from Mexico, and even if you're a high school dropout, you don't get to consume that high school benefit. So you start paying taxes and working immediately. Furthermore, there are lots of restrictions on the ability to use these benefits that should be, these restrictions should be higher. It should be more difficult to get. I've helped Representative Grothman, who's a Republican from Wisconsin, do that by helping him write a few bills on this. But the evidence from the peer-reviewed academic literature is that immigrants are either break even, they pay their own way, or they produce a very small net benefit.
Alex Nowrasteh of the Cato Institute. I'm going to have Ann Coulter come on later to curse the day you were born. That's really interesting conversation, really interesting arguments. I appreciate your coming on. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.